Ex-convict or hero?
I love my homeland. I obey Putin. Shoigu gave us a good scrubbing.
Just Putin's chef or the father of Russia's most brutal private military company?
The celebration of Victory Day is the victory of our grandfathers. We haven't earned this victory by even a millimeter.
His mercenaries fought in Ukraine, Syria, and Africa. He publicly humiliated generals, accused the authorities of lying, and promised to achieve justice.
We approached Kiev, then, as they say in Russian, we disengaged and pulled back our forces.
He led a bold military march toward Moscow and directly challenged the Kremlin and the supreme military commander himself.
This entire conflict was deemed necessary, just so a handful of corrupt scum could feast.
This is the story of a man who, albeit late, came to the realization that Putin has no friends and perhaps paid the ultimate price for it. Although many are convinced, Putin started hiding in the bunker even more often after he discovered that his chef might still be alive and was secretly planning a coup in Russia. Yevgeny Prigozhin is one of the most vivid symbols of the Putin era. An era where a former convict can become a billionaire, the owner of his own army, and the country's main propaganda hero, and almost reach Moscow with an armed rebellion.
Temperature plus 50. Just the way we like it.
Prigozhin's story is tied to crime, corruption, violence, a cult of strength, and the closest ties to the Kremlin.
Always remember, gentlemen, that this entire country will eventually be ruined by widespread corruption.
Prigozhin was born in Leningrad in 1961, a fellow countryman and almost the same age as Putin. And like many future members of the Russian elite, he didn't start in government service at all, but from the very bottom of the criminal world. While his future boss was mastering the sophisticated methods of the KGB, the other was cunningly climbing the bloody career ladder of a street gangster.
But what should the country do? What should our children, grandchildren, and the future of Russia do?
And how can we win a war if by chance, I'm just suggesting, it seems that this old man, a complete bit...
In his youth, Prigozhin wanted to become an athlete, but crime turned out to be more profitable. At 18, he received his first suspended sentence for theft. In criminal circles, he was known by the nickname Jaco.
Show me a wealthy individual, and I'll gladly take all of his money.
Moreover, Yevgeny was not just some teenager who made a mistake, as Russian propagandists would later claim in his biography. His gang was involved in robberies and assaults. It was during one of these attacks that Prigozhin was apprehended. He was sentenced to 13 years in a penal colony, a very symbolic beginning for Russia's future hero. Especially considering that later, this man would give lectures on patriotism and loyalty to the motherland. The pro-Putin publication DNI.ru published an interview with his cellmate. The interview was apparently intended to create a positive image of Prigozhin, a favorable image. It turns out that in prison he did sports, went to the gym, and fought for justice with the administration, defending the interests of the inmates. But at the same time, it's mentioned in passing that in the camp, Prigozhin was a brigade leader. In other words, a kozil, a snitch. Kozli, also known as activists or positively inclined inmates. This is a kind of caste of prisoners who make their living by cooperating with the administration. In the colony, Prigozhin quickly adapted and even started his first business. Nothing unique, he just tried to curry favor and informed on other inmates to the authorities.
My incorruptible one, betraying at the right time is not betrayal, it's foresight.
After being released in 1990, the murkiest part of the chef's biography begins. Prigozhin himself came up with a story about selling hot dogs, helping his father in business, and other nonsense. But the criminal world never let go of Prigozhin. That's why he got involved with organized crime groups in St. Petersburg.
Back then, we really thought we were the strongest ones around.
Not even 10 years will pass before the former convict opens elite restaurants in St. Petersburg, where both gangsters, law enforcement, and city officials, including Mayor Anatoly Sobchak, will dine and relax. Well, and where is the owner then? We're just his lackeys. The one who is Putin. It was at that time that Prigozhin met an inconspicuous little man with a huge ego, whom he would later milk and serve for many years.
We do not provide this food to anyone besides FSO employees. However, I want to ensure you understand the situation.
In the 2000s, from the moment Putin planted his rubbery behind in the presidential chair, Prigozhin's company, Concord, began receiving enormous government contracts. In addition to grand banquets at the Kremlin, his firm also started catering for schools and the army. At this point, Zhako finally became Putin's chef. Although in reality, Yevgeny had long since stopped being a chef and had become one of the shadow managers of Putin's system.
Let's start with Wagner and the chefs. So, all my chefs. They are employees of the Federal Protective Service. They are military people holding various ranks. I don't have any other chefs. This needs to be clear and understood so that we don't have to come back to this again.
While Russians were being told about traditional values and patriotism on television, people from Putin's inner circle were literally swelling with billions from budget flows. In
Russia, hijacking entire train loads is much safer than stealing a bicycle. And so,
after 2014, when Putin dared to seize Crimea and started the war in Donbass, Russia began to actively use unofficial instruments of war. Later in the West, this would be called hybrid warfare. Of course, a notorious scoundrel and opportunistic swindler like Prigozhin was among the very first to rush to support his reclusive bunker-dwelling master and old friend. That is exactly when the infamous armed gang known as Wagner first emerged onto the global scene.
Biber and Dolik. This is Biber and this is Dolik. Therefore, at the very moment the military encounters significant challenges, they will immediately rise up and block the way. The path of the Ukrainian army.
Despite the fact that mercenarism is strictly forbidden under federal law in Russia, thousands of armed men with tanks, artillery, and aircraft quite openly and calmly began fighting in Donbass, Syria, and Africa, carrying out various unofficial and secret orders from Putin.
If it means earning money, I am willing to do absolutely anything.
At the same time, Prigozhin pretended for a long time that he had nothing to do with it at all, even though the whole world already knew perfectly well. Wagner is the Kremlin's shadow army, led by Putin's former chef.
Of course, they want this. What do they want? They want to say, "Oh, great one, oh, greatest of all, you are the great creator. Yes, you are nobody. You have already torn everything apart."
In Syria, Wagner fighters guarded oil fields and fought for Moscow's interests. Enormous amounts of money were circulating there. Putin and Prigozhin's army gained access to gold, diamonds, and other resources. Of course, the Kremlin denied its connection to Wagner for years. According to the
Russian constitution, all private military companies are still strictly illegal.
Did you all see that? Cocaine, gold bars, and fake passports. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Prigozhin was fabulously wealthy. For example, he owned private jets.
So he owned a Hawker 800 XP jet. He often flew it to countries like Sudan, Libya, or for example, the Central African Republic. Countries where he has many business assets. Since 2017, through the company Lindbergh, businessman Prigozhin has owned a private British Aerospace 125 jet. Prigozhin also has a personal Embraer Aeroj 135 registered on the Isle of Man.
He used these planes not only to travel to hot Africa to visit the Wagner fighters, but also to luxurious villas in unfriendly countries.
Currently, I am here in Africa, so for those who enjoy discussing the details of my elimination, my private life, my personal earnings, or anything else. In fact, I want you to know that everything is going quite well. In
his native St. Petersburg, the head of the PMC wasn't particularly modest either, settling in the luxurious cottage community of northern Versailles. It sounds and looks just as impressive.
The plot is 1.3 hectares. We immediately see the house. This is most likely a swimming pool with a glass roof, and over here, something like a greenhouse. And this, as far as we understand, is a covered parking area for that very car collection. And right here, it's very nice. Flagpole with the national flag. They can lower and raise it, just like at a school assembly. There's a fountain here. Now we fly over to the adjacent plot belonging to Prigozhin's daughter. Her house with 2 buildings is located here. We approach from the other side to get a better look at the basketball court and the helipad.
A residence was built for him on the Black Sea coast in a nature reserve.
On land belonging to the Forest Fund, by the way, where construction is actually prohibited. But that's only forbidden for ordinary people. Putin's chef is allowed. The plot covers almost 4 hectares. And here we see 2 groups of cottages. A house with a swimming pool stands on an elevation. From there, you get a wonderful view of the Black Sea.
And he spent his leisure time on his extremely expensive yacht.
The 37-meter yacht St. Vitamin cost 6 million euros. It was reported that its interior is done in the Versace style. This yacht has as many as 6 bedrooms, a lounge, a terrace, a kitchen, and staff quarters.
Just imagine, staff quarters on a luxurious yacht. Some of Prigozhin's most notable personal hobbies included a collection of expensive vintage cars and elite thoroughbred racehorses.
Do you think it's just for nothing lying there showing off your head in stories?
Prigozhin didn't neglect and spoiled his eldest daughter as well. For her lavish wedding, Polina received 1 million scarlet roses. And of course, she earned millions of dollars herself, helping her father with his business. That's how she secured herself a rich and carefree life, with
Such amazing luck, and it is still free.
Lyubov, the one who is Prigozhin's wife, received an entire chocolate factory and a chain of wellness centers from Sujanov's gangster profits. She is definitely not a gray mouse. She is an active participant in the business schemes of the media empire that Prigozhin created.
Rather than engaging in open combat, we find ourselves perpetually enveloped by political intrigue. In fact, we have a ministry of intrigue instead of a ministry of national defense. That's why our army is running away.
Putin's chef only gained real popularity after the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine. In 2022, he finally stepped out of the shadows.
We barged in rudely and stomped our boots all over the territory, looking for Nazis. While we were searching high and low for Nazis, we engaged in the slaughter of everyone we encountered and reached Kiev. Then, to put the situation quite bluntly, we pulled back. Then we went to Kherson, pulled back once again, and somehow absolutely nothing seems to be working out for us.
Suddenly, the embezzler and bandit became the main face of the occupying army. The former convict traveled to prisons and personally recruited inmates. Fortunately, he knew how to talk to them in the same language.
You really will not be all that different from us. You'll be treated the same way, right? At certain times, even more favorably than those who have been loyally fighting by my side for many years, and have been through countless battles and wars.
He didn't shy away from talking to murderers and rapists. And with ease, he promised them freedom in exchange for new murders and atrocities, but this time with the permission of the Russian authorities. Almost no one in Russia was even slightly disturbed by the fact that convicts would be released from prison. People seemed to be mesmerized by Prigozhin. He spoke harshly, swore, criticized generals, and created the image of a man of the people. A real man who supposedly tells the truth.
Then, after 6 months, then you go home, having received a pardon. Those who want to stay with us, please stay with us. So you see, there is absolutely no option to go back to prison. None at all.
They hid the main thing. Wagner is a murderer. At the same time, Russians were proud of this armed rabble and admired their brutality. A former convict and Wagner PMC mercenary. He managed to surrender. While in captivity, he spoke about the brutal treatment of convicts in Wagner PMC. If you do something wrong, they zero you out. November 11th, 2022. He was supposed to be exchanged by Ukraine for their own prisoners. The next day, November 12th, a video of the execution appeared on Telegram. He was executed with a sledgehammer, accompanied by comments from Wagner PMC, in the spirit of Hammer of Retribution and similar slogans. Prigozhin turned the instrument of sadistic execution into his own advertising brand. But the inevitable happened. The chef became too convinced of his own importance. He began openly humiliating and criticizing those who led this war. The Russian Ministry of Defense. June 24, 2023 changed everything. Prigozhin began his famous March of Justice.
We only found out when we had already arrived. That's when they said, that's it, we're heading to Moscow.
Wagner columns shot down Russian helicopters, entered Rostov without resistance, and seized the headquarters.
On the main Moscow highway, one of the assault units suddenly came under heavy fire from helicopters. In the Wagner PMC units, everyone is safe. The helicopter was destroyed and is burning in the forest belt.
The Wagner fighters trusted their commander and moved decisively toward Moscow, encountering almost no resistance. All of Russia froze. Putin's power vertical turned out to be just a facade. No one understood what to do. The security forces did nothing. The National Guard disappeared. Kadyrov's men were driving somewhere very slowly. Officials were hiding. Propagandists were hysterical. And Putin himself was so frightened that he just sat in silence for a long time. And only when things became truly awkward did the bunker coward finally give a speech about a stab in the back. And
consequently, actions that undermine and fracture our unity are in essence a profound betrayal of our people, a betrayal of our comrades in arms who are now fighting at the front. It is a stab in the back to our country and our people. It was precisely this kind of blow that was dealt to Russia in 1917 when the country was fighting in the First World War.
But Prigozhin was ultimately unable to carry out his plan to the end. When it seemed like it was the end, Putin's regime seemed doomed, but Wagner suddenly turned its columns around. According to one version, it was Lukashenko who talked Yevgeny out of it, and most likely Prigozhin himself became frightened by what he had done.
This is outright betrayal. An overwhelming sense of ambition and personal interest ultimately resulted in treason. Treason against both his country and his people, and against the noble cause for which, side by side with our other military units and divisions, the fighters and commanders of the Wagner Group fought and died.
The mutiny was the last straw that exhausted Putin's patience. Although Prigozhin's days were already numbered when he decided he had the right to criticize the system from within. Devious and vindictive, Putin waited, even allowing his wife to return to Moscow. But just a few days later, a business jet crashed in the sky over the Tver region.
In this footage, you can see the plane falling without a wing. It broke apart while still in the air. Obviously, from an external impact, later parts of the aircraft were found several kilometers from the crash site.
There were 10 people on board. No one survived. Among them was Putin's chef, Prigozhin. As for
Regarding this tragic aviation disaster, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my most sincere and heartfelt condolences to the families and the loved ones of all those who have lost their lives. It is always a tragedy. And as a matter of fact, if there were, and it certainly seems there were, initial preliminary information currently suggests that there were also a number of different employees of the Wagner company on board. I would like to note that these are people who made a truly substantial, highly significant and noteworthy contribution to our important shared collective mission of fighting the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine.
the official versions from the Kremlin, as usual, were as vague as possible. But Western media and intelligence agencies almost immediately began talking about the most likely scenario being the elimination of the traitor. And what is that? Supposedly the plane crash was the result of a contract killing. Most likely an explosive device that had been previously planted detonated on board. And this sounded much more logical than the version about a sudden technical malfunction of the plane, or the even more laughable one about careless handling of a grenade. I wonder, did they spend a long time coming up with something like that about the highly experienced military specialists who were on board? But what was surprising was not the elimination itself, but how much of a public spectacle this execution became for the entire Russian elite. For many years, Prigozhin was the perfect soldier of Putin's system. He did the Kremlin's dirty work. His troll factory interfered in various political elections and spread propaganda.
The maintenance and upkeep of the entire group in Africa was completely and fully covered by the government of the state. Through the Ministry of Defense and drawing from the state budget, we have provided the funding to ensure that we fully financed this group.
His people carried out various bloody purges in Syria as well as Africa. His convicts stormed Bakhmut. And Putin fully welcomed every bit of this, right up until the moment Prigozhin continued to be convenient. In Putin's Russia, no one is irreplaceable. There are only those who are temporarily useful. Just in the past year, according to Putin, Russia spent 276 billion rubles on Wagner and contracts with Prigozhin. From May 2022 to May 2023, 86 billion was spent on mercenary payments. Another 110 billion was paid for PMC insurance. Additionally, 80 billion was the total value of Prigozhin's conquered contracts with the Ministry of Defense for military food supplies. Let me remind you, he was the monopolist. That's over 276 billion rubles. Just think about it. From the Russian budget in a single year, all of it went to Prigozhin. An investigation into Prigozhin's death was never conducted. The investigative committee opened a criminal case for violation of aircraft operation rules. Foreign experts were not allowed to participate in the investigation. Representatives of the International Aviation Committee explained this by saying that the crash occurred on a domestic flight. After Yevgeny Prigozhin's death, his company lost all contracts with the Ministry of Defense. But who inherited that very empire? Prigozhin's empire in Africa? All of Wagner's assets have been completely taken over by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and now the mercenaries will be remembered at most once a year. Who killed Prigozhin?
Well, I think no one did. There is no death. Everyone is alive. Everyone is alive. Even if they died, everyone is alive. Who killed him?
Do you actually believe the official version Putin gave? That they were under the influence of drugs and tossing grenades around?
No, of course not. That's nonsense. Come on, serious men. Whoever was involved in that, they wouldn't have flown together. Well, it's fair to say there is certainly some fertile ground there for conspiracy theories. In fact,
the media started to suspect after that. This phrase means that Putin's chef might still be alive. We've been told that Gubarev, in several private conversations, has already said that Prigozhin will return, liberate Donbas, and restore order in Russia. For now, we can't give a clear answer to the question of whether Prigozhin is alive. So, in the near future, we'll find out if Gubarev has any information, or if his words are just nonsense from someone who's not very well. Just the ramblings of a not very healthy person. The Kremlin has started to worry and become afraid. What if the death was staged? We, the SVR, along with several other agencies, have been tasked with conducting a thorough investigation into the possibility that Prigozhin did not die. Serious investigative actions are being carried out, and it is not ruled out that Gubarev will be questioned. Moreover, they are planning to question him about other matters as well. For example, about why, in that same interview, he made an unacceptable statement about our president. What if Prigozhin was simply hidden away temporarily to give him another chance to overthrow the government? Prigozhin's death. I will never believe it. Everything was planned in advance. It's just an excuse to avoid responsibility to the relatives. He will continue to live under a different name. In 2026, during the propagandistic Immortal Regiment March in St. Petersburg, Wagner fighters marched for the first time carrying a portrait of Yevgeny Prigozhin. And this became yet another warning sign and a blow to the cowardly Putin. He retreated even deeper into his bunker, and he started appearing in public with increasing rarity and less frequency. Whispers and rumors began to circulate widely that a final investigation was being prepared, which would require exhuming the grave to satisfy and appease the Kremlin paranoiac. I want to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. Every single fact and event is presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated manner to effectively communicate a comedic or dramatic effect. We do not aim to mislead, but simply highlight the underlying humor. Please take all of this with a smile.